Welcome to Lost Echoes. Here, we peel back the layers of forgotten true life stories, bringing to light the mysteries that time has tried to bury. If you're ready to dive deep into compelling narratives, please hit that like button and subscribe to become part of our journey. Okay, let's get into it. This is a compelling and disturbing story, presented with a remarkable level of details. Are you ready? Okay, brace yourself and let's get into it. In 1969, an adventure magazine reporter named Milt Macklin journeyed to New Guinea with his film crew. Their mission was to document the search for a missing person, Michael Rockefeller, who had vanished in the area. Macklin harbored the ambitious hope of finding Rockefeller alive and capturing the moment on film, believing it would elevate his documentary to unprecedented heights. However, despite extensive filming and a thorough search of the region, they failed to locate the missing man. Disappointed, Macklin returned home, storing the raw footage without ever reviewing it. Years later, this unexamined footage was retrieved by another documentary crew, also interested in the mystery surrounding Michael Rockefeller. As they meticulously reviewed the reels, they stumbled upon something utterly astonishing. This discovery would unravel a highly disturbing truth about Michael Rockefeller's fate. The story began on Saturday, November 18, 1961. Michael Rockefeller, a 23-year-old man, was on a 40-foot catamaran, two handcrafted canoes lashed together, in the Arafura Sea, off the coast of New Guinea. He repeatedly tugged at the pull cord of the outboard motor, but the engine stubbornly refused to restart, only sputtering. Without power, Michael and his small crew found themselves drifting further and further out to sea. Compounding their predicament, the catamaran was slowly but surely sinking. Minutes earlier, they had been navigating happily along the lush, jungled coast of New Guinea. Their trouble began when they attempted to cross a particularly turbulent stretch of water where a brown river emptied into the blue Arafura Sea. The confluence created a choppy expanse of rough waves. As they tried to traverse this area, waves washed over the catamaran, flooding the engine and causing it to shut down. More waves continued to deluge the vessel, accelerating its sinking. Michael's perilous journey was driven by his desire to visit the Asmat tribe, who resided on the coast, just beyond the turbulent river mouth. He was captivated by their unique artwork, particularly the bisque poles. These poles, crafted by master carvers of the Asmat, were intricately etched from a single piece of wood, designed to resemble men standing on each other's shoulders. While beautiful and intricate, these bisque poles were not merely artistic creations for the Asmat. They believed the poles contained the souls of warriors killed in combat. Until the Asmat avenged these fallen warriors by killing their enemies, the souls remained trapped within the poles. Consequently, the Asmat rarely parted with these sacred objects. They were an integral part of their culture. Months prior, Michael had visited the Asmat tribe, learning about the bisque poles and their profound significance. He believed he had successfully negotiated a trade, offering his own goods in exchange for one of their bisque poles. Despite Michael having provided all the agreed-upon items, the bisque pole had not been sent to him. He was now returning to hopefully claim it. However, as Michael sat in his sinking catamaran, watching the muddy shores of New Guinea recede and drifting further into the Arafura Sea, the bisque pole was far from his mind. His immediate concern was survival. Michael's crew consisted of three others, a French anthropologist named René Wassing, and two Asmat teenagers serving as guides, Simon and Leo. After Michael's failed attempts to restart the engine, all three took their turn, yanking on the cord without success. Finally, Simon and Leo suggested that their only hope was to abandon the sinking catamaran, jump into the ocean, and swim to shore, which was then about half a mile away. They cautioned that if they waited any longer, the current might carry them too far to make the swim. René, however, was not a strong swimmer, and Michael was reluctant to completely abandon the catamaran. On board were valuable supplies he had brought for bartering with the Asmat: tobacco, fishing line, clothes, and candy, items he knew the tribe wouldn't have. He envisioned using them as leverage to secure the bis pole and other artwork. Although he understood the catamaran and its contents were inevitably going to sink, he wasn't mentally prepared to abandon it just yet. A decision was made. Simon and Leo, the two Asmat guides, would swim to shore alone and seek help, while Michael and Renee would remain with the catamaran and await rescue. Moments later, the two teenagers plunged into the water and began their long swim. As Michael watched them, the stark reality of his distance from his own world dawned on him. It had been months since he had showered, leaving him with an unpleasant odor, severe sunburn, and hands rough and calloused from constant rowing. This was a stark contrast to Michael's real life. Michael Rockefeller hailed from America, from one of the most renowned, influential, and wealthiest families in history. His grandfather was John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon, and, at the time, literally the richest man in the world. His father, Nelson Rockefeller, was the governor of New York and future vice president of the United States. Despite access to unimaginable resources, Michael was not inclined to follow a conventional Rockefeller path. Instead, he found his calling in the wild landscapes of New Guinea. He had first arrived in New Guinea 7 months prior with a team of Harvard University filmmakers who were documenting a remote tribe. Michael quickly fell in love with the adventure, even enduring an accidental arrow shot to the shoulder during the filming of a battle between this remote tribe and another. Despite being wounded in what was effectively combat, Michael cherished his time in New Guinea. In fact, he never told his family about the arrow wound, fearing that the powerful Rockefellers would retaliate against the tribe that had inadvertently harmed him. Michael held a deep respect and protective regard for the people he encountered in New Guinea, often viewing them as more his people than his own family. After the Harvard filmmakers completed their documentary and returned to America, Michael chose to remain in New Guinea. Meanwhile, his father, Nelson Rockefeller, had opened the Museum of Primitive Art in New York, which exhibited artwork from places like New Guinea. In the early 1960s, many Westerners viewed the natives of New Guinea, including the Asmat tribe, as primitive and backward. Consequently, many were drawn to this new museum simply for the spectacle it offered. However, Michael believed he possessed a deeper understanding of the New Guinean natives. He felt it was his responsibility to seek out incredible artwork throughout New Guinea, such as the Asmat bis poles, and send it back to his father's museum. He aimed to make the museum more than just a spectacle, hoping to foster appreciation and respect for the natives of New Guinea among Westerners, mirroring his own sentiments. He believed art was the vehicle for achieving this. To this end, Michael had partnered with Renee, the French anthropologist, to scour New Guinea for artwork to send to his father. Several hours after Simon and Leo had jumped from the sinking catamaran, Michael and Renee had no idea if they had reached shore. No rescue had appeared. As far as they knew, they had no indication of impending help. Looking down, they saw their catamaran sinking lower and lower. At some point, Michael and Renee resorted to bailing water out of the catamaran with buckets, a futile effort as the water was coming in too quickly. As they bailed, a rogue wave crashed over, flipping the entire catamaran and throwing Michael and Renee into the sea. Fortunately, both managed to swim to the surface and reached the now upturned catamaran. An air pocket trapped underneath kept it afloat. Michael and Renee clung to the catamaran, with Michael also attaching a gas canister that had come off the boat to his belt as a flotation device. They continued to wait, desperately hoping Simon and Leo had made it to shore and that help would soon arrive. In the back of Michael's mind, he knew that if rescue didn't come soon, he might have to attempt the drastic measure of swimming to shore himself, a distance now far greater than half a mile. By the next morning, when the sun rose, Michael and Renee were still in the water, clinging to the catamaran, still no sign of rescue. Michael was an excellent swimmer, but by this point, He estimated they were at least 5, possibly even 10, miles from shore, a gargantuan swim in rough waters. Yet, being a Rockefeller, he possessed a strong sense of confidence. He began telling Renee, "Hey, I'm going to do this swim. I know I can do it. Even if it's 10 miles, I can do it. You're just going to have to hang tight. It's going to take a while, but I'll get us help." Renee pleaded with Michael not to go, but Michael insisted, "I have to do something. Otherwise, we're going to die out here." All Renee could do was watch as Michael stripped off some of his clothes, attached another gas canister to his belt for added flotation, shook Renee's hand, and then, around 8 a.m. on Sunday, November 19th, 1961, Michael began his swim. Approximately 12 hours later, that night, while Renee still clung to the catamaran, hoping for help, the sky suddenly erupted with a brilliant flame. It was a plane flying overhead that had spotted Renee and the upturned catamaran. They had fired a flare into the air, signaling, "Hey, we see you. We're going to send help." Just a couple of hours later, a boat arrived and picked Renee up. As Renee climbed aboard, filled with immense relief, he asked the captain, "Hey, did Michael Rockefeller tell you I was out here? Is that why you knew I was here?" The captain replied, "No, we were told by 2 teenagers, 2 guides, Simon and Leo, that you were out here. No one has heard from Michael." Given that Michael Rockefeller was a Rockefeller, as soon as Renee heard that Michael's whereabouts were unknown and explained that Michael had embarked on an unbelievably long swim to shore for help, it was as if a bomb had detonated within the Rockefeller family. They immediately committed all their immense wealth, resources, and influence to launch what was arguably the largest manhunt ever to find Michael. They dispatched ships, helicopters, and planes, even involving the U.S. Navy. They searched everywhere for weeks, but Michael was nowhere to be found. The search for Michael continued for years, albeit with less intensity than the initial weeks. Someone or some entity was always looking for Michael around the area where he had begun his swim. However, by 1964, 3 years after Michael had started his swim to shore, the Rockefeller family finally accepted that Michael must be dead, that he had drowned during that 5 or 10-mile swim. For the last 60 years, that remained the accepted story in America about what happened to Michael Rockefeller. His sister even wrote a best-selling book about grieving his loss. However, in New Guinea, a very different narrative began to circulate about Michael's fate. Rumors of his destiny were whispered along trade routes, exchanged between visiting missionaries, and gossiped about in tabloids and adventure magazines. In 1969, 5 years after Michael was declared dead by his family, Milt Macklin, the adventure magazine reporter, received a tip from a mysterious Australian source for his magazine. This source claimed to have recently encountered Michael Rockefeller alive in the New Guinean jungle, not far from where he had supposedly disappeared. Despite the dubious credibility of the tip, Macklin pursued it. He traveled to New Guinea with his film crew, scoured the designated area, and interviewed locals, but found no trace of Michael. Feeling utterly let down, Macklin returned home and wrote a best-selling book about his quest to find Michael Rockefeller. Crucially, though, neither he nor his team had ever truly reviewed the extensive footage they had shot, both from a distance and up close, of various tribes in the area where Michael was thought to be. They had simply filmed while searching for Michael, failed to find him, and then set the footage aside. 40 years later, another documentary film crew decided to go to New Guinea to investigate the persistent rumors that Michael was alive and living in the jungles. Before embarking on their journey, they uncovered and watched the unexamined footage from Milt Macklin. Among the hours of film, they discovered something incredible, a brief shot taken from a distance where the film crew was filming from land towards the water. A canoe entered the frame, filled with Asmat tribe warriors, a war party presumably heading into battle with another tribe. But among these strong men, one figure stood out, a naked, bearded white man who, despite the poor film quality, strongly resembled Michael Rockefeller. As soon as news of this footage spread, rumors quickly circulated worldwide that the heir to a billionaire's fortune had chosen to forsake his family and live among the Asmat tribe as one of their own. It is important to note that there was no definitive proof that this was indeed Michael Rockefeller. It could easily have been a missionary or another white person in New Guinea. Nevertheless, the sensational story captivated the world. In 2012, for years after the unexamined Milt Macklin footage came to light, and over 50 years since Michael Rockefeller's disappearance, a National Geographic journalist named Carl Hoffman, who had grown up fascinated by the mystery surrounding Michael Rockefeller, decided to go to New Guinea to finally uncover the truth. After months of living with the Asmat tribe with his interpreter, gaining their trust and respect, they began to tell him a completely new story about what truly happened to Michael, a story he had never heard before. They gave him a dire warning. If he ever revealed what actually happened to Michael, the entire village would likely be killed, and he too might face the same fate. But Carl did not heed their warning. After learning the full, horrifying truth, he left New Guinea and wrote a book about it titled Savage Harvest. From his book, here is what truly happened to Michael Rockefeller. On the morning of November 19th, a strange chant. All 8 canoes, all 50-plus members of the tribe, chanted in unison. Michael, who had studied the Asmat tribe and felt knowledgeable about their culture, had never heard this particular chant before. He was enchanted by it and tried to ask them what it meant, but they completely ignored him, continuing to paddle and chant. Michael just lay there, listening, being carried along to safety. All of a sudden, the chanting stopped. The canoes turned and made their way into a small inlet that led to a clearing right on the shore. Michael noticed they were slowing down, and he barely managed to sit up and look over the edge of the canoe to see if they were at their village. But when he looked up, he saw no village in sight. It was just a clearing on the shore. Immediately, Michael thought, well, I hope we're going to the village soon because I have to find someone who can get in touch with the authorities who can then go and rescue Renee and hopefully find Simon and Leo as well. Michael began trying to ask the men in his canoe for help, but there was a massive language barrier and neither side truly understood the other. Then, at some point, one of the Asmat men began laughing at Michael. When he did, the majority of the rest of the tribe looked over, saw what was happening, and they too began laughing at Michael. Michael had no idea what was going on. Before he could react, the entire tribe stopped laughing. In an instant, they were back into their rhythmic chanting as they slowly began making their way out of their canoes and onto the shore. Michael began to sense that something was terribly wrong. Instead of getting out of the canoe with the rest of the tribe, he instinctively laid back down on the canoe, almost as if trying to get away from them. When he did that, the tribesman who had first laughed at Michael stood directly over him, still chanting, and smiled at Michael. Then he raised his spear and drove it into Michael's side. The second he did that, other members of the tribe raised the horns they were carrying and began blasting into them. Michael screamed in pain, but he had no strength to defend himself. He rolled over onto his other side in the canoe, trying to protect himself. When he did that, the man simply lifted his spear again, with a big smile on his face, and drove it into Michael's other side. After the man pulled the spear out, Michael, in excruciating pain, managed, perhaps fueled by adrenaline, to pull himself up and over the side of the canoe, falling into the mud. He tried to stand up and get away from them, but there was nowhere to go. As he fumbled in the mud, two of the tribesmen walked up behind him, grabbed him under the arms, and began carrying him across the clearing towards the jungle. As they walked, the rhythmic chanting continued, and periodically Michael would hear someone blast on their horn. Michael was dragged across the shoreline, into the jungle, and finally to another clearing in the jungle, far from their village. Michael was positioned in the middle of this clearing, put on his knees. He guarded his sides with his arms, incredibly weak, on his knees. The tribe formed a circle around him, continuing their chant. At some point, one of the tribesmen walked up to Michael, grabbed his head, and pushed it forward, exposing the back of his neck. Then another tribe member walked in, and again, the whole time, the chanting was going on, horns were blowing. This other tribesman came up, raised an axe, and brought it down on the back of Michael's neck. It would turn out that the Asmat tribe knew who Michael was. They remembered him from his visit several months earlier when he had attempted to barter for their bis poles. They had been deeply offended that this rich white man had shown up and thought he could simply buy one of their sacred artifacts as if it were a trinket to be displayed in a museum. They had harbored a deep hatred for him. That was why they hadn't sent him the bis pole. They were never going to give it to him. But when Michael had seemingly magically floated into their river and the Asmat tribe suddenly had him sitting in their canoe, the three village elders, Finn, Ajem, and Pep, simply looked at each other and nodded in agreement. They were going to ritualistically kill Michael to avenge the deaths of many of their fallen warriors whose souls, they believed, were contained within the bis poles. Many of their warriors had been killed by white men in the past, and so Michael was going to be their way to avenge those souls. That chant that Michael heard them all saying was the chant they performed during this execution ritual. Except they didn't just kill Michael. After one of the tribesmen brought the axe down on the back of Michael's neck, another tribesman walked up and grabbed Michael's hair, pulled his head back, and used a knife to slash at his throat, actually removing his head. After his head was removed, with all the chanting continuing in the circle the whole time, members of the tribe came up and began cutting Michael's body absolutely to pieces, separating his organs, flesh, and bones into different piles. Then, very quickly, they started a fire and cooked and ate Michael. Of all the parts of his body that were eaten, his brain was apparently the most important, and so only Finn, Ajem, and Pep, the three elders, were allowed to eat the brain. Finally, after they had finished eating and took all the remaining meat that had not been consumed and put it into their pouches to eat later, Finn, one of the elders, took Michael's skull. He would bring it back to the village, cover it in banana leaves, paint it, and treat it like a trophy. A few days later, when that huge search party came through the area looking for Michael, the Asmat tribe knew they could never whisper a word about what had happened to Michael. If it got out, it was very likely that Westerners would retaliate against them. And so, for decades and decades, their secret remained safe until Carl Hoffman of National Geographic heard the story and then wrote the book about it, Savage Harvest. Despite the publication of this book and its wide readership, there remains some question about the credibility of the story. Given the initial intrigue and mystery surrounding Michael's disappearance, and now this account coming from the Asmat tribe, no one truly knew how legitimate it was. To this day, the Rockefeller family and, generally speaking, authorities at large still maintain that Michael